I betrayed my own brother by sleeping with his wife, confessed like a fool expecting forgiveness, he lost his mind, ended his marriage, and now the woman I ruined everything for has made my life a living hell. I slept with my brother's wife for 9 months and then sat him down and told him about it because I thought honesty would set us free. I want you to read that sentence and understand the magnitude of the stupidity. Not just the affair. The confession. The arrogance of a man who detonates a bomb in his brother's living room and then stands in the rubble expecting applause for being brave enough to light the fuse. That was me. 30 years old, sitting across from the only person in the world who had never given up on me, and telling him that I'd been sleeping with his wife, and believing, genuinely believing, that because I was the one saying it, because I chose honesty, because I came to him instead of waiting to be caught, he would somehow find a way to forgive me. He didn't forgive me. He looked at me like I was already dead. And then he did something worse than screaming, worse than hitting me, worse than any reaction I had prepared for. He got up and left. Quietly. Completely. Forever. My brother walked out of my life 3 years ago and I have not heard his voice since. Not a text. Not a voicemail. Not a message through anyone. He erased me. And the woman I destroyed everything for, the woman I thought was my great love, my meant to be, my reason for burning the world down? She didn't turn out to be any of those things. She turned out to be the punishment. Let me tell you about my brother. His name is Nate. He's 2 years older than me. And for the first 28 years of my life, he was the best thing I had. Not the best person I knew. The best thing I had. Because I didn't have much. Our parents divorced when I was 6 and Nate was 8. Our mother moved across the country. Our father drank himself into irrelevance by the time I was 12. Nate and I were raised, effectively, by our aunt for the back half of our childhoods, and then by each other once we were old enough to leave. We shared apartments. We split bills. We worked jobs that didn't pay enough and covered each other when one of us came up short. Nate was the steady one. The one with the plan. The one who got a trade certificate in HVAC, worked his way up to a supervisor position, saved money, built credit, did everything the way you're supposed to do it when nobody's coming to save you. I was the other one. The one who drifted. Who changed jobs every 8 months. Who borrowed money and paid it back late. Who had ideas that never became plans and plans that never became action. Nate never held that against me. Not once. He'd lend me money and say, "Don't worry about the timeline." He'd let me crash on his couch between apartments and never make me feel like a burden. He was the floor I stood on. And I ripped it out from under both of us. Nate married Alexis when he was 26 and I was 24. Alexis was a paralegal. Smart. Sharp. Attractive in a way that commanded attention without asking for it. She had this energy, this intensity, that made you feel like whatever she was focused on was the most important thing in the room. When she focused on Nate, he lit up. When she focused on me, I should have looked away. I didn't. That's the first confession inside the confession. I was attracted to my brother's wife from the beginning. Not casually. Viscerally. The kind of attraction that lives in your chest and makes your hands do stupid things and your brain shut down when she laughs at something you said. I knew it was wrong. I cataloged it as wrong. I filed it in the part of my brain labeled things you will never act on because your brother is the only person who has ever loved you unconditionally and this would destroy him. I filed it correctly. And then I walked into that file room and set it on fire. The affair didn't start with a dramatic moment. It started with proximity. Nate worked long hours. He was building a career. He was pulling overtime and weekend shifts because he wanted to buy a house and give Alexis the life he thought she deserved. While he was working, I was around. I was between jobs again. I was crashing at their apartment for a few weeks while I figured things out, which was my permanent state. Alexis worked from home some days. We'd be in the same apartment. Alone. For hours. Coffee became conversation. Conversation became confession. She told me things about her marriage that she shouldn't have told me and that I shouldn't have listened to. She said Nate was emotionally unavailable. That he worked too much. That she felt invisible. She said these things while sitting 2 feet from me on a couch my brother had paid for, in an apartment my brother had leased, wearing a ring my brother had saved for. And I listened. Not because I cared about her pain. Because her pain gave me permission. Every complaint she made about Nate was a brick I used to build a justification for what I was already planning to do. I told myself I was just being a good listener. I told myself I was filling a gap my brother had left. I told myself that if their marriage was strong, this wouldn't be happening. I told myself 100 lies and every single one of them had the same purpose, to make what I wanted feel like what was right. The first time it happened was on a Thursday afternoon in August. Nate was at work. I was on the couch. Alexis sat down next to me. Closer than usual. She said, "You're the only person who listens to me." I said nothing. She put her hand on my arm. I let her. She leaned in. I leaned in. And the line that I had sworn I would never cross evaporated like it had never existed. Because it hadn't. Not really. Lines are only as strong as the person standing behind them. And I was weak. I had always been weak. Nate was the strong one. I was the one who drifted, who borrowed, who took what wasn't his because taking was easier than building. And in that moment, on that couch, in my brother's home, I took the thing that mattered most. Not because I loved Alexis. Because I wanted to feel, for once, like the brother who won something. I'm going to be honest about that because it's the ugliest truth in this story and I owe it to the damage I've caused. My attraction to Alexis was never really about Alexis. It was about Nate. About being the one who had what he had. About proving, in some sick, subconscious competition I'd been running since childhood, that I wasn't the lesser brother. That the drifter could take something from the steady one. That the floor could be pulled from underneath the person who'd been holding everyone up, and for once, I'd be the one standing. I know how pathetic that sounds. I know. But the truth about betrayal is that it's almost never about the person you're betraying with. It's about the person you're betraying. And I betrayed Nate because some broken part of me needed to prove that even his life, even his wife, even his stability, could be disrupted by me. That I mattered enough to destroy something. The affair lasted 9 months. We were careful. We had systems. I'd come to the apartment when Nate was at work. Alexis would clear her schedule. We had codes in our texts. We had a cover story for every scenario. It was sophisticated in the way that deception forces you to be sophisticated, not because you're smart, but because you're terrified. And I was terrified. Every single day. Not of getting caught. Of what I was becoming. Because I could feel myself changing. I was looking at Nate differently. When he'd talk to me about his day, about Alexis, about the house he was saving for, I couldn't maintain eye contact. When he'd clap me on the shoulder and say, "You'll get on your feet, bro. I believe in you," I'd feel something curdle in my stomach. The trust he gave me was so pure, so unquestioning, so deeply rooted in a brotherhood that had survived a broken home and absent parents and years of me being the less reliable one, that receiving it while actively betraying him felt like swallowing acid. But I swallowed it. Every day. For 9 months. Because stopping would have meant admitting what I'd done. And admitting what I'd done would have meant losing everything. The irony, the brutal, obvious irony, is that I lost everything anyway. I just took the scenic route. The confession happened because of guilt. Not noble guilt. Corrosive guilt. The kind that eats through your sleep and your appetite and your ability to look in the mirror without flinching. By month 8, I was barely functioning. I was drinking every night. I was having panic attacks in parking lots. I was lying awake at 3 a.m. running scenarios. What if Nate finds out from someone else? What if Alexis tells him? What if he sees our texts? The paranoia was eating me alive. And somewhere in the paranoia, a thought took root that I now recognize as the most dangerous kind of self-deception. I convinced myself that confessing was the right thing to do. That honesty would be my redemption. That if I went to Nate, man to man, brother to brother, and told him the truth, and showed him that I was taking responsibility, he would see the courage in that. He would be devastated, yes. But he would eventually, maybe in months, maybe in years, see that I respected him enough to tell him myself. That I was brave. That I was honest. That I was, in some twisted way, being a good brother by giving him the truth instead of letting him find it from someone else. The arrogance of that reasoning still makes me nauseous. I wasn't being brave. I was offloading my guilt onto the person I'd wronged. I was making him carry the weight of my honesty so I could feel lighter. The confession wasn't for him. It was for me. And I dressed it up as integrity so I could live with what I was about to do. I went to Nate's apartment on a Saturday morning. Alexis was out. He was watching basketball. He had a cup of coffee on the table and his feet up and he looked relaxed in the way Nate always looked relaxed at home, fully, comfortably, like a man who trusted his world to be exactly as it appeared. I sat across from him. He muted the TV. He looked at me and said, "What's up?" With the casual warmth of a man who had no reason to brace himself for what was coming. I said, "I need to tell you something." He said, "Okay," I said, "I've been sleeping with Alexis." The silence that followed was not the kind you can describe. It wasn't empty. It was full. Full of everything that was being reprocessed behind his eyes. 9 months of my presence in his home. 9 months of Alexis's excuses. 9 months of trust, rewritten in real time, from love to betrayal. I watched it happen on his face. I watched his expression go from confused to disbelieving to understanding to something I had never seen on my brother's face before and hope to never see again. It was the look of a man watching his family die in front of him for the second time. The first time was our parents. This time was me. He didn't yell. He didn't stand up. He didn't reach across the table. He looked at me and he said, in a voice that sounded like it was coming from the bottom of a well, "How long?" I said, 9 months. He said, "In my home?" I said, "Yes." He said, "On my couch?" I said, "Yes." He closed his eyes. He sat there with his eyes closed for about 15 seconds. When he opened them, the person looking at me was not my brother. Something had left. Something fundamental. The thing in his eyes that had always said, "I'm here for you," the thing that had survived our parents' divorce and our father's drinking and every failure I'd ever brought to his doorstep, that thing was gone. Extinguished. Like someone had reached behind his eyes and turned off a light that had been burning for 30 years. He stood up. He picked up his coffee cup. He walked to the kitchen. He poured the coffee down the sink. He rinsed the cup. He set it on the counter. Methodical. Precise. Like a man performing the last normal actions of his life before everything changes. He walked to the bedroom. I heard drawers opening. A zipper. He came out with a duffel bag. He walked to the front door. He put on his shoes. He picked up his keys. I said, "Nate. Please. Say something." He stopped. He turned around. He looked at me. And he said two words that I hear every single night when I close my eyes. "We're done." He walked out. He got in his truck. He drove away. I sat in his apartment, in his silence, on the couch where I'd first betrayed him, and I waited. I waited for the phone call. The angry text. The voicemail screaming at me. The knock on the door with fists or tears or both. Something. Anything. A reaction I could work with. A fight I could engage in. A door I could knock on. Nothing came. Not that day. Not the next. Not ever. Nate didn't fight for the marriage. He didn't confront Alexis. He filed for divorce within the week through a lawyer. He changed his number. He moved. He told our aunt, the woman who raised us, what happened, and she called me exactly once to say, "You have broken the only good thing in your life. Don't call me." Then she hung up. I had expected forgiveness. I had expected a fight. I had expected the full range of human responses that brothers give to brothers in crisis. What I got was amputation. Clean, surgical, total. Nate didn't just leave my life. He removed every trace that I'd ever been in his. He blocked me everywhere. He told mutual friends that he didn't want to hear my name. He dismantled the only relationship that had ever mattered to me with the same quiet efficiency he used to build everything else in his life. And then there was Alexis. The woman I destroyed everything for. The woman who was supposed to make it all worth it. The woman I thought was my person, my reason, my great love story written in the wreckage of my brother's marriage. Let me tell you what happened when the smoke cleared and I was left alone with the woman I'd chosen. Alexis and I became official within 2 weeks of Nate leaving. I moved into the apartment. His apartment. The apartment he'd leased, furnished, and maintained. I slept in his bed. I used his kitchen. I sat on the couch where I'd first kissed his wife. I told myself it felt like a new beginning. It felt like a crime scene. But I couldn't admit that. Not yet. Because admitting it would mean the affair was pointless. That I'd lost my brother for nothing. So I told myself the story I needed to hear. Alexis and I were meant to be. This was fate. The pain we caused was temporary. The love we had was permanent. I said these things out loud, to Alexis, to the few friends who still spoke to me, to myself in the bathroom mirror at 2 a.m. I said them like incantations. And for about 3 months, I almost believed them. Then the mask came off. Alexis without Nate was a different person. Not subtly different. Fundamentally different. The woman who had been soft and vulnerable on the couch, who had told me she felt invisible, who had leaned into me with a neediness that made me feel essential, that woman evaporated. What replaced her was someone I didn't recognize. Controlling. Critical. Relentless. The same intensity that had once felt like passion now felt like surveillance. She monitored my phone. She questioned every absence. She'd call me 4 times during a 2-hour errand, and if I didn't answer, I'd come home to a woman sitting in the dark with a list of accusations that sounded rehearsed. I realized, slowly and then all at once, something that should have been obvious from the beginning. Alexis hadn't cheated on Nate because she was in love with me. She'd cheated on Nate because she needed control. Nate, with his steady temperament and his unshakable calm, was impossible to control. He didn't react to provocations. He didn't beg when she withdrew affection. He didn't chase when she pulled away. He just continued being himself, steady and reliable, and that drove her crazy. She needed someone who would scramble. Someone who would chase. Someone who was insecure enough to be managed, malleable enough to be shaped, desperate enough to mistake control for love. She needed me. Not because I was better than Nate. Because I was weaker. And weak men are easier to steer. The criticism started small. Why don't you have a better job? Why can't you be more motivated? Nate would have had this fixed by now, she said that. She actually compared me to the man I'd betrayed. The man whose life I'd helped destroy. She'd look at a leaky faucet or a broken shelf or an unpaid bill and she'd say, "Nate would have handled this." And I'd stand there, absorbing it, because what was I going to say? She was right. Nate would have handled it. Nate handled everything. That was the whole point. That was what I'd envied and resented and ultimately tried to steal, and now the woman I'd stolen was using his competence as a weapon against my inadequacy. The irony was so precise it felt designed by someone who wanted me to suffer. The relationship became a prison within 6 months. Alexis controlled the finances. She controlled the social calendar. She controlled what I wore, what I ate, how I spent my time. When I pushed back, she'd say, "You destroyed your life for me. The least you can do is show me you're worth it." And she was right. I had destroyed my life for her. So I owed her. That was the logic. The debt of the affair was now the currency of the relationship, and she spent it freely. Every argument ended the same way: "I gave up my marriage for you." Never mind that she'd been the one leaning in on the couch. Never mind that the affair was a collaboration. In Alexis's version, she had sacrificed her stable life with Nate for me, and I was failing to be worth the sacrifice. And because guilt is the most effective leash ever invented, I stayed. I absorbed the criticism. I accepted the control. I let her reshape my life into a structure that served her and diminished me, because leaving would have meant admitting that I'd lost Nate for nothing. And nothing was the one word I couldn't face. I want to describe what it's like to live with a person you destroyed your life for and realize they're destroying you too. It's not dramatic. It's not cinematic. It's a slow, daily erosion. You wake up and you look at the ceiling and you think, this is not what I imagined. You go to work and you think, Nate is somewhere right now, living his life without me, and I'm here, in his old apartment, being managed by his ex-wife, and this is what I chose. You come home and you sit on the couch and she starts talking and you listen, but you're not hearing words. You're hearing the absence of your brother's voice. The absence of "you'll get on your feet, bro." The absence of the only person who ever believed in you without conditions. And you realize that the love you thought you were chasing was never love. It was a void. A hole shaped like your brother's approval that you tried to fill with his wife. And the hole is still there. It will always be there. Because the only person who could fill it is the person you destroyed. I left Alexis 14 months after we became official. I didn't leave heroically. I left broken. She'd worn me down to a version of myself that I couldn't stand to look at, unemployed, isolated, dependent on a woman who reminded me daily that I was less than the man she'd had before me. I packed a bag on a Wednesday afternoon while she was at work. I left the key on the counter. I drove to a motel. I sat on the bed and I stared at the wall and I thought about calling Nate. I picked up my phone. I dialed the number I'd memorized years ago, the one he did before he changed it. Deadline. Of course. He'd changed it 3 years ago. I didn't have the new one. Nobody would give it to me. I was locked out of my brother's life with the same finality as a door that's been welded shut. And I deserved it. The family fallout was complete. Our aunt, the woman who raised us, maintained contact with Nate and cut me off entirely. She was 73 and she had the moral clarity of a woman who had sacrificed years of her life raising 2 boys who weren't hers, and she was not going to spend her remaining years comforting the one who had betrayed the other. She told a cousin, who told me, that Nate was doing well. That he'd moved to a new city. That he had a new job, a new apartment, and that he seemed lighter. Lighter. My brother, the man who had carried me for 30 years, was lighter now. Because he'd finally put me down. I moved to a different city. I got a job at a warehouse. I rented a room in a house with 3 other men, all of us mid-30s, all of us starting over from something. I didn't tell them my story. They didn't ask. We passed each other in hallways and kitchens and nodded, and that was enough. I started therapy. Not because I wanted to. Because the alternative was drinking myself into the same grave my father had dug, and I could feel the shovel in my hand. My therapist, a man named Dr. Abrams who looked like he'd heard worse but probably hadn't, asked me in our second session, "What did you think would happen when you confessed?" I said, "I thought he'd be angry but eventually forgive me." He said, "Why?" I said, "Because he always forgave me. For everything. My whole life," he said. "So you relied on his pattern of forgiveness to absorb the worst thing you'd ever done to him?" I said, "Yes," he said. "And when the pattern broke, you had no plan?" I said, "I had no plan," he said, "because you weren't confessing for his benefit. You were confessing to relieve your own guilt, and you assumed his love was strong enough to survive the transfer." I sat there. I couldn't speak. Because he described, in 3 sentences, the exact mechanism of my destruction. I'd used Nate's love as a garbage disposal. I'd fed my guilt into it and expected it to process the waste and keep running. But love isn't a machine. It's a living thing. And I'd poisoned it. Nate. Let me tell you what I know about Nate. Which is almost nothing. And that almost nothing is the loudest part of this story. He's alive. He's in a different city. He's working. A cousin mentioned, in a rare moment of communication, that Nate had started his own HVAC business. That he'd bought a small house. That he was seeing someone. These fragments reached me like light from a distant star, real, but from so far away that they felt theoretical. My brother has a business. My brother has a house. My brother has a life that is whole and stable and entirely without me. He built it the way he builds everything, from the ground up, with his hands, in the quiet, without fanfare. And the fact that he was able to build it, that the removal of me and Alexis from his life didn't destroy him but freed him, is the detail that hurts the most. Because it means I wasn't the foundation I thought I was. He was the foundation. I was the weight. And when he put me down, he could finally stand at full height. I want to talk about what I've lost because people hear he slept with his brother's wife and they think the consequence is the brother's pain. It is. But there's another consequence that nobody talks about, the loss of the person you destroyed. I don't mean Nate as a person who exists in the world. I mean Nate as a presence in my life. The voice on the phone. The hand on my shoulder. The man who'd show up with a six-pack when I got fired and say we'll figure it out. The person who knew my whole history, every failure and every shame, and chose to stay anyway. I lost that. Not temporarily. Permanently. And the permanence of it is the thing that makes it unsurvivable. Because you can grieve a person who died. You can visit a grave. You can say their name and feel the loss and know it's over. But grieving a person who is alive, who is out there somewhere, who is building a house and running a business and loving someone new, and who has decided with full consciousness that you no longer exist. That's a grief that has no resolution. No closure. No end. It just sits in your chest like a fist that never unclenches. And every morning you wake up and the fist is still there and you think, today. Maybe today I'll stop feeling it. And you don't. Because you can't outrun the absence of the only person who ever made you feel like you were enough. I'm 33. I live alone. I work. I see Dr. Abrams every other week. I have no friends from my previous life. The friends I had were Nate's friends. When the truth came out, they chose him. All of them. Without hesitation. I make new acquaintances but I don't let them close because letting someone close means they'll eventually learn who I am, and who I am as a man who betrayed his own brother for a woman who turned out to be his punishment. Alexis. Last I heard, she's with someone new. I found out through social media I shouldn't have been checking. A photo. A man I don't recognize. Her arm around him. Her smile, the same smile she gave me on that couch. The same warmth. The same focus. The same "you're the only person who listens to me" energy that I once mistook for connection and now recognize as a lure. She'll do to him what she did to Nate and then to me. She'll find the weakness and she'll exploit it until the structure collapses. Because that's not a behavior. That's an identity. And I was too blinded by my own need to see it until I was standing in the rubble. People ask me if I do it differently. The question is so obvious it's almost insulting. Yes. I do everything differently. I'd get off the couch. I'd leave the apartment. I'd stop listening to another man's wife complain about another man's marriage. I'd file Alexis under never and weld the cabinet shut. I'd tell Nate, to his face, "Your wife is trying to pull me in and I'm not going." I'd be the brother he deserved instead of the brother I was. I'd choose loyalty over ego. I'd choose his trust over her attention. I'd choose the boring, quiet, unsexy act of being someone's brother over the thrilling, destructive, temporary act of being someone's mistake. But I didn't. I chose the couch. I chose the leaning in. I chose the 9 months and the cover stories and the guilt and the confession that was really just another selfish act disguised as courage. I chose to destroy the only person who ever loved me for nothing because I wanted to feel, for one moment, like the brother who won. I won nothing. I lost everything. And the everything I lost has a name. It's Nate. He's out there somewhere. Building a house. Running a business. Living a life that is quiet and steady and whole. Living the life I should have protected instead of dismantled. Living proof that the strong brother doesn't need the weak one. That the floor can exist without the weight. He's out there. And I'm here. In a rented room. In a new city. With a therapist and a warehouse job and the permanent, unrelenting knowledge that the best person I ever knew deleted me from his life because I gave him no choice. I gave him no choice. That's the part I can't get past. I didn't just betray him. I robbed him of the option to keep me. Because keeping me would have meant accepting what I did. And Nate, who accepted everything, who forgave everything, who carried everything, finally found the one thing he couldn't carry. Me. And he set me down. And he walked away. And he never looked back. And the silence he left behind is the only honest thing I've ever earned.